Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our 6th reading of this, the 15th season of the Milwaukie Poetry Series. I'm Tom Hogan, the coordinator of the Milwaukie Poetry Series, and I want to thank you for being with us tonight, both those of you who are viewing us live on the live stream, and those of you who will be seeing us on the video, which is going to be posted on the Ledding Library YouTube channel. We are all here at the Willamette Falls Media Center in Oregon City. So with me to my right is my lovely wife, Jane. I'm going to be introducing our poet, Doug Stone, in just a few minutes. And on the technical crew tonight are Josh Reynolds from the Willamette Falls Media and Bev Spurgeon from the Milwaukie Poetry Series Committee. So thank you, Josh and Bev, for making this all go tonight. You know, I was driving out here tonight and we saw a beautiful sunset, and there was red in the sky. So it was very clear that the days were getting longer. And that was certainly something that was very welcome. So thank you for being here. We hope you are all well and safe. I want to make some thanks too, some additional thanks before I introduce Doug. One is to the city of Milwaukie. So we have been supported by the city of Milwaukie basically from the beginning. So we appreciate that a lot. Secondly is the Ledding Library of Milwaukie. We are a committee of the Ledding Library, and we appreciate their support. And thirdly is the Milwaukie Poetry Series Committee. As you know, and you've heard me say many times, that you don't have something happen unless you have a group of people working on it. So we have an active poetry committee. We have had from the beginning, and so that's something that's really a great benefit. So a big thanks to the people of the Milwaukie Poetry Series Committee. I want to say a word about a Q&A when Doug finishes the reading. So we are going to have a question and answer. So if there's something that is on your mind that you want to ask now, or you want to ask during the reading as it comes up, put it in the chat and we will try and take those questions when we get to the Q&A. So, I've been very excited to have our poet here tonight, ever since I saw him read at the Lansu Chinese Garden. Doug Stone is a 4th-generation Oregonian, and he lives with his wife amid hop yards and vineyards near the Willamette Valley in Benton County. In past lives, as he describes it, he has worked on a county road crew, been a grocery store clerk, a caseworker, an analyst and a consultant on public policy issues to state governments, AARP, and the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Department of Justice. He's also a poet. He has won the Oregon Poetry Association's Poetry Choice Award and is a Pushcart nominee. His poems have been published in numerous journals and in the anthology, A Ritual to Read Together, Poems in Conversation with William Stafford. He has written 3 volumes of poetry, The Seasons of Distress and Clarity, The Moon's Soul Shimmering on the Water, and Sitting in Powell's, Watching Burnside Dissolve in Rain. That's quite an image. Sitting in Powell's, watching Burnside dissolve in rain. Would you join me in welcoming our poet tonight, Doug Stone? We're glad to have him here.
Thank you, Tom. And thanks to the series committee and the city of Milwaukie and the Ledding Library for this opportunity to read tonight. What I'm going to do is read mainly from my latest book, Sitting in Powell's, Watching Burnside Dissolve in Rain. The book is in 4 sections, and the first section is called The Power of Place. And I'd like to read 3 poems that kind of describe the perception of 3 different people on what it's like to live in Oregon during the winter. Sitting in Powell's, watching Burnside dissolve in rain. Eliot got it wrong. April isn't the cruelest month. It's January, and I'm sitting in Powell's watching Burnside dissolve in rain. This is the time of year when it's hard to live in Portland, Even its bright, sharp weirdness has faded away in this incessant rain until nothing's left but a dull gray city. As the afternoon begins to droop like winter-weary eyes, headlights and taillights ignite the traffic spray and Burnside glows like a dying ember. Sidewalks fill with locals hunched under umbrellas, pushing like patient salmon against the constant downpour. I want to go to Phoenix. That perception may be from, say, somebody who moved here during one of our wonderful summers and is now dealing with the consequences. But here's another view. This is in the voice of a person who's made their peace with Oregon rain. Letter from Oregon. When I first arrived, I was told there would be a sadness in the rain-soaked winter light, as if something was lost and might never be found again. Then I learned to listen to the rain and walk without the burden of my shadow. Here the rain tells the truth about everything it touches, the hard city truth of glistening concrete, glass, and steel, the soft, lush truth of those things green and living, the quiet truth of a landscape always under low-slung clouds softening in the song of winter rain. On those rare days when the winter sun ignites the sky, it tries to tell me the weight of my shadow is a gift, but I no longer trust the promise of bright, cold light. Rain will be gray. That is the nature of rain. But it will never be indifferent, and it will never lie. That, too, is the nature of rain. And here's a third perspective. Sometimes when people, particularly when you move to a place, you bring with you where you were from. And sometimes that remains the power of place for you, even though you are elsewhere. And I think this was the situation with my grandmother. She came to Oregon just before the turn of the last century. And she came from the Midwest. And I think she lived here all of her life, but she never really left the Midwest. The power of place, in memory of my grandmother. Here on the Oregon coast, rain squalls have been shouldering off the ocean all afternoon. Between squalls, the January sun troubles down the left margin of the sky like a misspelled word, neither warm nor bright, just wrong. The ocean looks like a vast sheet of crumpled steel. My grandmother never liked the ocean. It couldn't be trusted. It moved like a surly, shifty thug. She came from the Midwest, where the land was firm and honest all the way to the horizon. Another squall blows over me, and I remember how she never cared for our long gray seasons of rain. If I really wanted to see her glow, I'd ask her about Iowa winters. Thick, deep snow, she'd say, so white it burned your eyes. The glass-sharp sky so blue, you could hear it crack. She'd close her eyes and still hear the laughter of long-dead loved ones ringing in the frozen air. My grandmother lived here almost 70 years and died at 92, her memory racked with dementia, so bad she often didn't know where she was. But sometimes she'd close her eyes, and through the murky gray of her dementia, she'd see that young school teacher she was before she came west, and she would recite the names of Iowa's 99 counties in alphabetical order. This next poem is an ode to the Wilson River Road. If you're not familiar with the Wilson River Road, if you're heading to the coast on Highway 26, the Sunset Highway, heading towards Cannon Beach or Seaside, and you decide to go to Tillamook, you could take the Wilson River Road. It would veer off to the southwest. The Wilson River Road is like a lot of roads in Oregon. Basically, from the I-5 corridor all the way to the California border, there are roads that head off to the coast. And most of these roads are very much like the Wilson River Road. They have two things in common, I think, almost all these roads, or they did when I was growing up in the 50s and 60s. One thing they had in common is that they were probably the most horrible roads in the world. They zigzagged through the Coast Range. They were built for logging trucks, not tourists. One of the first lessons I learned in driving was we were coming back from the coast. I didn't drive yet, and we came on a loaded logging truck just ready to crest the Coast Range. And he was really lugged down, and I told my dad, pass him, let's go. And Dad said, no, if he's that close to if you pass him, you're going to be able to see every bug in his grill all the way down the other side. So we'll just follow anyway. But the second thing these roads have in common is the fact that they all take us to the Oregon coast. And it's one of those great gifts that Oregon has that is a definite treasure. Whenever I feel too full of myself and I am absolutely convinced I'm the center of the universe, all I have to do is go over to the coast and stand by the Pacific and realize that I'm not the center of the universe. And I'm not convinced a significant portion of this country has that opportunity. I think they don't have that natural phenomenon like we have with the coast that can put things in perspective. And if you also remember, the Wilson River Road was also the road that William Stafford was on when the road in Traveling Through the Dark, probably his most iconic poem. The Wilson River Road, thinking of William Stafford. The Wilson River Road can be a nasty stretch of asphalt, especially at night, shouldering through the mountains like a mean drunk staggering toward the coast. But this road is also a poem reciting its way along the river, its sharp swerves and curves, poetry of pavement, reading the mountain dark. It is a road of shadows, the river's voice and south wind dancing in the trees. A road like life, so many turns, so many decisions, so many places where it can all go wrong. And midway through your journey, you may wonder if the trip is really worth it. But as your headlights search for that final curve near the end of the road, you feel the ocean breathe new life into your soul. You're no longer just traveling through the dark. Now you know you've been on the right road all along. Let's go on another road. Let's go on I-84, a little bit east of the Dalles. If you're driving out on I-84, about 13 miles east of the Dalles on the freeway, there'll be a sign that'll pop up that simply say Sililo Falls. And if you look over, there are no falls. You almost may doubt that there's even a river there. It looks more like a lake. And this poem is a requiem for Sililo Falls. When I was a kid, we used to stop on our way to my granddad's place in eastern Washington. As we walked toward the sound of the falls, I heard the air shatter, felt the ground quiver. It was the ancient voices of all those rivers that make up the Columbia thrashed to a single angry roar by the clenched fists of the rocks, then tossed over the falls in a swirling froth of white water and mist, full of leaping salmon. The roar of the falls is caged in my memory. I can still hear that anger these many years after the dams lobotomized those ancient voices into the placid silence of the Columbia. They can't remember how to be a river anymore. I think it was in 1957 they finished the Dalles Dam and closed the last spillway. And in 4 hours, the falls were flooded. And up to that time, for 10,000 years, that had been a fishing grounds for the indigenous population. 10,000 years, and in 4 hours, it was gone. Let's keep going east. An old barn near Fort Rock. The high desert wanders off in all directions as if lost in its own emptiness. An old barn pummeled by 100 years of weather slouches in the sagebrush like a fighter trying to cover up, waiting for someone to stop the fight. The hot afternoon wind leans hard against the barn's last good side, body punching with gusts until I can hear its bones crack and pop. Punch-drunk, wobbly-kneed, quivering like it has for decades, the old barn still stands, not out of tenacity or the will to survive. It stands because it can't remember how to fall. Another thing I think we're blessed with in Oregon is, in fact, we have really two natural phenomenon where we can get our bearings. The coast, but also I've always found Eastern Oregon is that way too. When you get out into the distances in Eastern Oregon, you can also realize that you're not the center of the universe. It's a marvelous place, and it's just so easy to get lost in yourself. That's what this poem I was trying to accomplish. Somewhere between Bend and Boise. I'm lost in tire song on this two-lane blacktop, my windshield splattered with stars. High beams hollow out the dark as I power down this unfamiliar road. But on this endless empty highway, there is no danger except to die alone in wreckage of my own making. Here in the middle of nowhere, I don't need or want a map. I'm in this perfect sweet spot where my future is just the road beyond my high beams, my past, an empty rearview mirror. I want to read some poems from the second section of the book. The second section is called Ask My Shadow Who I Am. This poem came out of a workshop that Peter Sears was doing, and he always loved to use William Stafford's poem, Ask Me, as a prompt. And the prompt was to write a poem beginning with Ask Me, and then go from there. I didn't follow instructions. I started out by saying, ask me who I am. And then I thought, I wanted to change it. So I changed it to this, ask my shadow who I am. Ask my shadow who I am. It has been with me all my moments in the sun, but it only knows half the story of who I am. Who I am also walks the dark hours alone under a canopy of stars and loves the sacred silence and blind honesty of the night. To know me from my time in the sun is not enough. Ask the blind silence of the night who I am, but you must really listen. This poem also came out of a workshop. It was a workshop on narrative poetry, and I do really like narrative poetry and write a fair amount of it. And the task, this particular teacher didn't call them prompt, he called them challenges. The challenge was to write a poem, a narrative poem, that was totally untrue. And use your imagination, use the tools of poetry, metaphors, images. Try not to put anything that is from your own experiences. Strictly use your imagination. So I came up with this poem. Big Sister. I see her at the end of our lane, a silhouette against the winter sky, waiting for the school bus. She could be on the moon for all I care. After hearing hurry up or you'll be late one too many times, I'm sitting on the porch in a little heap of Big Sister resentment when I hear the bus gear down, slowing for a stop. Panic scores through me like an electric shock. The rule is simple. The school bus never waits. Knowing I'll hear I told you so forever, I start to run, but fall on the gravel, splayed and bleeding. Homework cartwheeling off in all directions as the bus hisses to a stop. Each window frames a face staring at the flailing catastrophe that is me. The bus rocks and seethes impatiently as the doors swing open for my sister. Beyond all misery and despair, the only thing I know to do is scream out her name. She hesitates, the driver frowns, she glances back at me, then slowly shakes her head. The doors slam shut, gears grind angrily, and with a shuddering lurch, the bus is gone. Her eyes are slits as she walks past me toward the inquisition that waits for us. She knows our mother will find more fault with her than me. That's what big sisters are for. As I follow, like shabby, unclaimed baggage bobbing in the wake of her disgust, the only thing that matters is she waited. I had a problem with this poem. The first time I read this poem in public at a reading, I read it just as it is. And when the reading was done, several women came up and told me how much they loved the poem about the big sister, because they were big sisters, and they loved how it told about the responsibility that they felt when growing up. And as they were talking, I suddenly realized that the possibility was they might ask me, how old was your big sister? And this is a total fiction. I have no big sister. And this dilemma of saying, I don't have a big sister, it's a poem, when they had engaged in the poem was frightening. And so now, whenever I read it, I do try to explain that it's a fiction. It's not true. This will be the last poem I want to read that came out of a workshop. This one was a workshop on voices. And again, the prompt was fairly simple. It appeared. You had to write a poem. The title of the poem had to be First Love. You had no choice. That was going to be the title of your poem. And you had to select a voice of the opposite sex. So I selected the voice of an adolescent girl, say maybe just starting high school. First love. It was the summer I first wore my new shadow, the one that made the sun so uneasy it didn't want to touch me. For I was all polish and push as I explored the ambivalent edges of my possibilities. When I first saw you, your strut and bluff made my new latitudes unsafe. My bones tightened as you walked by, but I didn't blink for fear you might disappear. Your smile stuttered as the sly of your eyes lingered against me. At first we talked as if we chewed on the gristled fringe of joy, our mouths full of diminishing stones. Then I learned to speak the careless language of your name, and even the stodgy wind pricked up its ears. I drank your slow lies with shallow sips, not wanting to see my reflection at the bottom of that cold, cold cup. Then your dangers crawled inside me and made a soft bed of my bones. My afraid was your awakening, and I could not look away. My tongue unhinged when I tried to say your name, but names no longer mattered. There was only the pulse and hum of the hot summer night, and I, outside my skin, disinherited everything I ever knew. Dog days. Beyond the perimeter of the shade, the sun is serious. Still, the dog is restless. He gets up, dragging his shadow like a curse, and wanders into the weeds, where a rotting rat smolders in yellow jackets. He rolls in that deadness over and over, legs flailing with an inconceivable joy, one with sun and earth and death, until he's spent. He wanders back to the shade and lies down, sides heaving, gulping the white-hot air. As the shadows lengthen, he's in another place, more dog than he's been in weeks, so complete in his rancid aura, oblivious to any human that might clutter his life. To the barista at Starbucks who told me caramel macchiato isn't the heroine in Two Gentlemen of Verona. Some coffee orders are short stories. Some are long as War and Peace, great sweeping narratives of blends, roasts, flavors, milks, temperatures with or without whipped foam, cream, shots, double shots, extra shots, more shots than the 1812 overture. The first time I heard caramel macchiato, cappuccino, americano, frappuccino, I thought the baristas were talking about characters in Two Gentlemen of Verona. The complexity of it all hits home, and I'm behind this woman whose coffee order defines her whole reason for being. She takes a deep breath and begins her litany of demands longer than Luther's 95 Theses and more complicated than the Treaty of Versailles. When she demands milk from Himalayan goats that only graze above 13,000 feet, I think the guy behind me is going to have a stroke. 20 minutes later, she's finally done, and the great engine of the coffee industry leaps to life, processing her order with hisses, gurgles, wheezes, whistles, rattles, bangs, and the bleats of an upset Himalayan goat. The whole coffee shop seethes like a steel mill. Then she takes out her pen, takes out her checkbook, and with the flair of John Hancock, she writes. The woman looks like she expects applause, but the line that now stretches through the shop and down the block only glares in stunned disbelief. The weary barista nods at me, and I move to the cash register as if to center stage, clear my throat, and recite my little poem. Coffee, please. Nothing more. Dark and hot. Let it pour. This is the third section of the book. It's entitled "The Season of Distress and Clarity." This first poem is in the voice of a young girl in middle school, and this harkens back to my days as a caseworker. This is the one case that probably haunts me because I was never able to see how it turned out. I was in the process of taking another job, and so I never saw how this really worked out. But the girl was trying to keep her family together. She had 3 younger sisters, while their mother, a single mother, was spiraling into schizophrenia. And she basically was taking over the role of mother, shopping, cooking, taking care of the kids, getting them off to school. Finally, the school noticed that she was just literally was exhausted and began to find out what the problem was. So this is in that girl's voice. Growing up with our crazy mother. When our mother began to unravel like a Jackson Pollock painting, I painted her like a Rockwell illustration for my sisters. When my mother began to fade away, I told my sisters she was the nightlight that cast the soft warm glow over them while they slept. When our mother disappeared, I buried her shallow enough for my sisters to remember, deep enough for me to forget. This poem, interesting enough, it was published in the scholarly journal, the Journal for the American Academy of Psychotherapy. They have I think it might be a biannual journal full of articles, scholarly articles on psychotherapy, but they also invite poets, and visual artists to submit works, and it always has a theme. And this poem was submitted, when this was submitted, the theme was, what's love got to do with it? So, anyway. This is another poem, a narrative that simply came from seeing a woman. I used to walk in the mornings, had a prescribed route, and at the end of that walk, for quite a while, I'd see a woman walking towards me, and she had the brightest red coat I've ever seen in my life. In fact, on days like it's been, these foggy days, I could see the coat coming through the fog before I could ever see her walking her little dog, and I just was impressed with that. But this poem also has a tinge of some work that I did in social services, but the primary focus was this woman in the red coat. Woman in the red coat. One day she gathered up all her expectations, put them in the closet, and married whatever came along. Soon after, she bought herself a bright red coat, and when he beat her senseless because he never liked red, she put the coat deep in that closet and forgot how to dream. She did her time, sometimes praying for an early release, and sometimes, as he raged in drunken sleep, she thought about getting up and walking out the door, but it was always too cold or dark or Tuesday. Then one morning she didn't hear him breathing, so she lay perfectly still beside him all day long, just a little bit afraid he wasn't really dead. At sunset, she got out of bed, opened the closet, and put on that bright red coat, then got back in bed, closed her eyes, and dreamed. The day she put him in the ground, she went to the shelter and found a little dog to match, and she bought a bright red collar and a leash to match her coat. I see her on her morning walks, rocking gently like a Russian nesting doll. Her little dog sweeps side to side at the end of his leash on invisible legs. Some think it strange she gave the dog her husband's name. She says it keeps his memory near, and she does so love to teach him little tricks, like heel and play dead. In my days of working in social work, I saw way too many abused women. And this was sort of in the stone age of support and resources that were available to them, and it was often so hard for them to be able to leave. So anyway. Now I'd like to read 3 poems. It's under the title of a Russian triptych. It's about a time in Russia when it was very dangerous to be a poet. And in the first poem, I mentioned the stray dog, and that was a cabaret that was in St. Petersburg where poets met and we're really trying to come up with a new poetry for Russia. And these poets included Anna Akhmatova, Osip Mandelstam, I think even Boris Pasternak might have been part of this. A Russian triptych. 1, 1913, St. Petersburg. 3 a.m. at the Stray Dog. We're all drunkards here and harlots. How wretched we are together. Anna Akhmatova. St. Petersburg is dead as an unlucky snake caught out in the cold. Vodka washed poetry away hours ago, drowned laughter, ignited old feuds and new affairs, until all around the cabaret, drunken poets fell into the merciful silence of sleep. Only Mandelstam sits, sober as stone, composing a poem in his head, slowly turning a shot glass like winding a watch, tighter, tighter, tighter. Outside, the white night squeezes the moon until it cracks. 2, 1935, Moscow. All things quiver with the past. Your eyes, the spark that shakes the wire, makes all things quiver with the past. Boris Pasternak. It is spring and months since I last saw you, but I was detained in the gray shadows of these government buildings, disappearing from my past until the officials were satisfied. In these shadows, the dirty snow still grieves on the sidewalk. The sky above these buildings drools in a heavy sleep, uninterested in finding the sun last seen here years ago being beaten and dragged off behind the clouds. I would guess you sit in our little cafe already drinking your second cup of coffee and lighting your third cigarette. Are your dangerous poems still scattered across the table as if those spies with unblinking eyes of stone are blind? Are you still flirting with that silly student who thinks he loves you, who stares into the future with eyes dulled by too many books and not enough dreams? Sometimes I want to walk out of these shadows and hear you speak the dead language of my name. But you are part of the past I must remember to forget. My papers are all in order now, and I must be more ordinary with each careful step I take. The safe color of the frost-bitten earth. A sad rumor of someone you used to know. Wow. 3, 1938, Siberia. Hunger. The word is flesh and bread. Osip Mandelstam. Stalin knew the hunger in Mandelstam's poems must be starved into silence. He sentenced him to be forgotten in the Siberian emptiness that devours horizons, and ordered the scud of distance to feed his poems to the gluttony of the wind. But Mandelstam's poems were bloodbound to the Russian soul and survived memorized on long walks through empty night streets of Moscow, whispered in tiny apartments and in those nervous little cafes where even the coffee was afraid. His poems were flesh and bread for hungry mouths that feasted on them over and over until the Russian air knew them all by heart, and the silence could never forget. This next poem, The Season of Distress and Clarity, it came about from reading a book by George Orwell. Long before he wrote Animal Farm in 1984, he wrote a book called The Road to Wigan Pier. He wrote it in the 1930s. He'd gone to the English Midlands and spent a lot of time with the coal miners in that area, and he wrote the book trying to demonstrate the plight of coal miners. So this poem, think about coal miners. The season of distress and clarity. It's like a locomotive on the march, the season of distress and clarity. Frank O'Hara. It's either stay or go home, die slower, slower. Life is always winter here. There is no hope of spring. So the men slugged down another round like hemlock, swallowed hard with a grimace and a prayer. Young girls fold their exquisite dreams into cedar chests, just as their mothers did, and wait for boys with mud on their boots to walk into the sturdy sadness of their lives and grow too comfortable to leave. The late hours rot in the silence of blame as women, their arms forever crossed, wait for men to stumble home mumbling lies of love, rubbed smooth by whiskey and shame as they are led off to the shivering grave of their beds. Frost gleams on tombstones and ruffles the dead grass, where children make love and promises they cannot keep. Thin ice on the river turns blue in the moonlight. Deep in slack water, fish stiffen to a hard sleep. And these are poems from the last section. The last section is entitled Legend. Legend. Legend says he took out his guitar, closed his eyes, and sang blues so honest you felt the pain of everyone you ever hurt. Legend says he sang the truth until his blues went blind, then put down his guitar, walked down to the river, and never came back. If you ask about his blues, those few who heard him sing just say, walk down to the river, close your eyes, and listen. I'd like to read three poems about what I consider Oregon legends. One's a visual artist and two are writers. The two writers that I'll read about are, as I get to them, they read at the series here, and you can find them in the archives. The first one's a visual artist. It's in memory of Rick Bartow. Things you know but cannot explain, in memory of Rick Bartow, Native American artist, died April 2nd, 2016. The morning of the day Rick left eased comfortably into itself, the way spring days do on the coast when winter is finally forgotten. The tides had their busy schedules to keep. The gulls squabbled among themselves on the beach or spiraled above the waves, shaping the cool spring wind to their liking. Newport busied itself with its Saturday business. By all accounts, the day he left was ordinary. But Crow knew the day an artist leaves is no ordinary day. That afternoon in his last dream, Rick gathered all those stories he'd run out of time to tell and asked Crow to give them back to coyote, owl, salmon, back to all the animals who told those stories to him because they trusted the honesty of his art. That evening, Rick walked through his mind one last time and packed those things he wanted to take with him on his next journey. Things you know but cannot explain. When Crow asked if he was ready, Rick took the last few breaths his tired heart could give him and left this life for his next, a spirit now of the universe, among the spirits of the trees, the animals, and the stars. Thinking of Ursula K Le Guin. The word must be heard in silence. There must be darkness to see the stars. Ursula K Le Guin. Walking in her beloved Steens, she stops, taking the long view at day's end. She watches the last thoughts of light drift across the high desert quiet. The river gleams like a ribbon trailing from the hand of a child running off to the edge of the earth. Above the stillness and fading light, the stars begin to sing their silent songs for her in the cathedral of the darkening sky. This last poem is in memory of Peter Sears. Peter was our seventh poet laureate, and I was lucky enough to take, I think, three workshops from him. But he was an incredible teacher and such a generous poet. He caught me after one session and said, you really need to put a book together. And you send me 40 poems, and I will select 20 that I think would make a really good book. And I'm not going to edit them, but do it, and let's see what we can come up with. I sent him the poems. He sent me 20 back, and I put them together, and it became the first book, and it was accepted. In memory of Peter Sears, teacher, poet, friend. I believe that when I hear a poem, I hear the silences between the words. Peter Sears. Auden said the death of the poet was kept from his poems, but he was wrong. When poets die, their poems know, and they grieve. For Peter, there came the time when time had run its course, when every breath he tried to take was broken and he had no more distance left in him. His poems knew he was dying. He kept no secrets from his poems. The honesty of his poetry had given them the strength to know the truth. When Peter stepped from this life into his next, his poems understood. He had prepared them well to be poems in a world without the poet. They grieved, oh, they grieved, but did so only in the silences between the words. I'd like to finish with a series of poems. It's written as a poetic correspondence between Du Fu and Lee Bai, the two famous Tang Dynasty poets, who did know each other and were friends and did in fact share poems between each other. But this is written, as a poetic correspondence. It's at a time when Lee Bai has been banished, which happened to him quite often, and he's been banished from the capital. And Du Fu, thinking of Lee Bai, tonight I miss your company, old friend. When they banished you far beyond these city walls, you became a free spirit wandering the wastes, a ragged vagabond, your pocket full of new poems of such exquisite beauty. Here in my comfortable study, my nervous poems try too hard to please. As my words grovel across the page, I think of you and your wonderful poems and wonder if banishment is a gift. But when autumn storms blow across the wastes, is your poetry enough to keep you warm? Wandering deep into autumn, Lee Bai to Du Fu. My mind is fallow as these autumn fields, every mile no different than the last. I haven't written anything for weeks. Last night I read my old spring poems again, but they only made me sad, so I left them at the side of the road and walked away. At first light across these empty fields, I saw my poems scattering from the pockets of the wind, and like a swirl of dead leaves, they were gone. This autumn morning, I think of you as I watch wild geese spiral up from the river and gather themselves into such lovely lines. The sky becomes the poem I would write for you, but my words wither in the presence of these birds. On this clear autumn night, Du Fu to Lee Bai. On this autumn night, I climb this hill to be closer to the moon. The sky is a festival of stars polished by the cold. I can see the moon touch every star, hear the wind count every needle on the pines, feel frost kiss excite every blade of grass. All my senses are so alive, I even thought I heard your distant voice, old friend. But that's too much to ask of this clear autumn night. These withered autumn wastes, Lee Bai to Du Fu. My donkey scuffs a skiff of snow for the last sweet blades of grass on these withered autumn wastes. They banished me from all I love, but you are still with me, old friend, if only in my thoughts. All around me, distance drags the horizons away, leaving only emptiness in the moaning wind. As light snow begins to fall, the sky fills with the raucous cries of joyous geese heading home. I've learned, old friend, not to look too long. I close my eyes and brace for the sorrow that will come when these geese are gone and I am alone again under an empty, silent sky. Du Fu on seeing Lee Bai after many years. The years are almost through with us, old friend. Each day we fade away a little more. Too soon we'll be a couple of ghosts, wandering lost and forgotten through the pavilions of heaven. Remember when we were so young and self-assured, how we strolled across the empire like spring showers across the fields, and we truly believed our poems would make the whole world bloom. When did that silken rain of who we were become this pale mist of who we are? And the last poem, Du Fu on the death of Lee Bai. There's a tinge of sadness in the evening air, a quiet sorrow for the passing of the light. But there's also the joy, the birth of the moon's soul shimmering on the water. The soul Lee Bai was trying to gather in his arms when he fell laughing into the river and drowned. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doug. If we were live, we would be hearing sustained applause.
Yes,
So I'd like us all here to be hearing sustained applause.
yes.
What a rich tapestry of poems and images that you've shared with us tonight. Before we get to the questions and answers, just a few of them that struck me. Like a misspelled word. On the Wilson River poem, like a mean drunk staggering toward the coast. The old barn was like a punch-drunk fighter covering up, waiting for someone to stop the fight. Your gears ground angrily. A dog dragging his shadow like a curse. Dragging his shadow like a curse. So thank you so much for the rich reading that you've given us tonight. Let's see what's on the chat. And we have it's great to be here from Lene Rutledge. And I understand, Lene, that you are actually in Palm Springs. So Doug tells me. So this is one of the great pluses of doing virtual readings, is that someone can log in from anywhere. So thank you for being here. Thanks, Doug, from Paul Ann Peterson, from Emmett Wheatfall, from Liz Nakazawa. I'd like to start off with a question and ask you who you're reading. Who you're reading, and maybe a second part of that question is who influenced you?
Actually, I've been reading a lot of Northwest poets. since the pandemic and really that feeling, that sense of being locked down, I've really been feeling a disconnect with Oregon. It just, part of it is not being able to travel near as much. And so I've been going back through reading poets that I've read before, but William Stafford, of course, Theodore Roethke, Richard Hugo, David Wagoner, Kim Stafford. The book I'm reading right now, I'm rereading, is Clem Stark's collected poems, Cathedrals and Parking Lots. And I think the last two new books that I got actually, again, are from contemporary Oregon poets. Mark Thalman, his book is Stronger Than the Current, and Gary Lark, who I think is going to read in a couple of months. Gary Lark, his latest book is Easter Creek. Both of them just have a voice and a recollection of Oregon that it's just been really useful.
Yeah.
The other thing I've been doing instead of and not reading is I've actually been going back through the archives that you have, 15 years of the series here. Again, just hearing Oregon poets and talking poems that do talk about Oregon, it just it did really help me, feel connected more so than I had. So.
Well, thanks for telling us about going back through the archives, because they are available, and that's what we hope people will do.
It's a treasure trove, and what's so interesting is to obviously it's full of voices, but it also has voices that are no longer with us. Peter Sears, Ursula Le Guin, and yet you can
Joe
still,
Soldati.
Yep, and it's just it's just neat to hear them again, and so it was sort of a guilty pleasure. It was in the evening I'd go up about 11 o'clock at night and just listen to an Oregon poet, and I highly recommend it. So.
A guilty pleasure.
A guilty pleasure. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Here's something that struck Pauline. To know me from my time in the sun is not enough.
Yeah.
That's lovely. And Pauline also says, Rick Bartow. Thank you, Doug, for your tribute to him. His medicine bundle paintings both memorize and terrify and thrill me.
Rick, if you ever get a chance to see any of his artwork, do it. Actually, the title of that poem, Things You Know But Cannot Explain, I wish I could take credit for that title, but it's actually a title of one of his works of art. They also used that title for a retrospective of his work that was put together by down in Eugene at the U of O campus. They put together a retrospective of his art that was touring the United States at the time that he died in 2016, and that retrospective just finished last January. It was, and if it ever is brought up again, and you get a chance to see it, the art is just incredible.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm going to ask Jane if she has any question that she'd like to ask.
I'm always intrigued at what made you start writing poetry, and how did that evolve?
It actually started a long time ago when I was in college, but I never got very serious with it. All of my work life, I wrote a few things, but not much, and had a few things published. It wasn't until I retired where I could really put that whole life behind me that I really began to really take it more seriously. Part of it just having the luxury of some time to be able to kind of structure how I wanted to do it. And so it's kind of come from there, and I joined some poetry groups, and that's been incredible. Several of these poems came out of poetry groups, and
Right.
It's just been a neat thing to do. And I have some friends that I've known. One of my best friends I've known since I was 5 years old. We still drink coffee once a week. And he's incredibly astonished that I write poetry. It's just it's something that it's just he just shakes his head. But he buys the books. So
I was going to ask you, do you read poems to him?
I'm sorry.
Do you read poems to him?
I every once in a while, just partly just to trying to bug him, I think. But like I say, he does buy the books, so that works. So.
Okay. Here's a question from Lene. What's the focus of your next book?
I don't know. It's interesting. The book, Sitting at Powell's, is the book I really always wanted. Everything about that book I love. And so I kind of thought that would be it. But I actually am starting to play around with some more ideas. I'm starting to play around with some more ideas of the Chinese poetry, some of those things. And so I'm kind of floating along, just kind of see what happens. And,
Okay.
And kind of go from there.
Okay. Well, what we're going to do to finish is I've got one more question here, and then Doug has a poem that he's going to end the reading with. So, Emmett Wheatfall asks, do you have a set writing time?
Actually, I sort of. It's flexible, but I usually write in the morning, and then another guilty pleasure I have that I could really never do while I was working was to simply go down to a coffee shop and sit down and drink a cup of coffee at my leisure. But what I do is take the poetry with me and work on it in a coffee shop. And maybe that's where the poem "The Barista at Starbucks" came from. I'm sure it probably did. But anyway, what's interesting, I've always found the noise in a coffee shop really doesn't bother me. It's this white noise, and it really just very rarely will a voice bother me. I'll work on the poetry, then I will take it home and work on it again part of the day, and then kind of start that cycle again. The bottom line is I don't know how much poetry I get done, but I am drinking a lot of coffee. So anyway,
And you're supporting them too.
yeah, that's it
Yeah.
exactly. It's yeah.
Well, what poem would you like to conclude with?
Actually, if you'll indulge me, I'd like to read two poems. They're not very long, but
Certainly.
as many of you know, I believe, that are listening, Eric Muller passed away in November, and Eric Muller was the consummate champion of Oregon poetry. He was a poet, a teacher, an editor, a publisher, and he championed Oregon poetry. He wrote Durable Goods as a book. If you can get your hands on it, I think Paul Ann Peterson, Clem Starks, Vern Ursula, Richard Dancliffe, Lex Runciman. He has essays about them, and it just shines about Oregon poetry, and that's what Eric was all about. And Eric helped me in my second book that I self-published. He sat down with me and we worked through the structure, and he was just so generous. And up until the time he passed away, we were exchanging poems. And so I'd like to read two poems from that book that he helped me put together in memory of Eric. Seeing my old friend off on his journey home. This morning the flowers in my garden are subdued, their scent bittersweet, because the river is waiting to take you on your long journey home. There only remains the pain of saying goodbye. The autumn currents are strong, the blue distance where sky and river meet is clear. The east wind will fill your sail and carry you far beyond the edge of the sky, old friend, but never beyond my thoughts. And the second poem, on the death of my old friend. How slow the bell tolls for my old friend. The cadence of his voice repeats his name again and again until every corner of the night knows who he was and how much we've lost. With each toll, I remember how much I loved him. And when that bell stops, the silence will ignite my selfish grief and my tears will fall for me. For Eric. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doug. Thank you for the reading. Thank you for those final two poems. Jessica Mehta is going to be here in March. Doug is right. Gary Lark is going to be here in April. And we want to say a thanks to all of you for joining us and hearing an Oregon poet read tonight, Doug Stone. Good night.